There are reunions that happen in quiet places, in hospital corridors, in airport arrivals halls, at front doors late at night with porch lights on. Private moments witnessed only by the people they belong to. And then there are reunions that happen under studio lights, in front of a live audience, on a game show that was only supposed to be about survey answers and prize money. Nobody planned what happened that afternoon on the Family Feud stage, not the producers, not the contestants, not Steve Harvey, who had hosted the show long enough to believe he had seen every possible version of a human moment that a game show could produce. He had not seen this one. When 67-year-old Gloria Simmons walked through the door marked contestants and took her place beside her family, she was carrying something that had nothing to do with the game. She had been carrying it for 23 years. A grief so old heavy that she had long since stopped calling it grief, and had simply accepted it as the shape of her life. She did not know that on the other side of the same studio, behind a different door, something was waiting for her that would change the shape of everything. By the time Steve Harvey understood what was happening, he would not be able to speak, and in his years of television, that had never happened before. Not once. Gloria Yvette Simmons was born in 1957, North Carolina, the third of 5 children raised by a father who drove a delivery truck and a mother who cleaned houses for families on the other side of town. She grew up understanding that life required effort and that dignity was not something given to you. It was something you maintained, quietly, every single day, regardless of what the day brought. She had been a good student, a devoted daughter, and then a devoted mother. She had married at 24, had 2 sons, Bernard and Clifton, and then, when she was 31 years old, had a daughter she named Renee. Renee was the youngest of the 3. She had her father's dark eyes and her grandmother's laugh, and from the time she was old enough to follow Gloria around the kitchen, she had been Gloria's shadow. The family had been happy. Not wealthy, not without its struggles, but genuinely happy in the way that families are when they know each other all the way through. Then, when Renee was 19 and a sophomore at North Carolina A&T, she made a choice that tore the family open. The details, as Gloria would describe them years later, were less important than the wound they left. There had been an argument, a serious one, about a relationship Gloria had opposed and a decision Renee had made against her mother's wishes. Words had been said that could not be unsaid. Renee had left. She had moved away with the man she had chosen. She had cut contact gradually, then completely, until the silence between them had stretched from months into years into something that no longer had a clear shape. Gloria's husband passed away in 2011. Clifton lived in Charlotte. Bernard lived in Richmond. The family had continued quietly. Around the absence of the youngest member, Gloria had retired from her job as a school librarian in 2019. She kept a photograph of Renee on her mantelpiece, a photograph from Renee's freshman year of college, 23 years old now, the colors fading slightly at the edges. She had not stopped loving her daughter. She had not stopped believing, in some quiet corner of herself, that the silence was not permanent. But she had stopped believing that she had any power to change it. She had written letters that went unanswered. She had called numbers that were no longer in service. She had eventually done the painful, necessary work of accepting that some doors, once closed, did not reopen on your schedule. The family food application had been Bernard's idea, submitted as a 60th birthday gift to his mother 3 years prior. When they finally got the call, Gloria had been genuinely excited, not because she expected anything beyond a good day with her sons, but because she had spent enough years in quiet rooms, and she was ready, for one afternoon, to be somewhere loud. She dressed carefully that morning. She wore her good navy dress and the pearl earrings that had been her mother's. She looked, as Bernard told her when she came downstairs, like a woman who knew exactly who she was. She did not know what was waiting for her on the other side of the studio door. Nobody had told her. Nobody had told her because the producers, who had spent the past 6 weeks carefully and quietly working behind the scenes, had been very certain of one thing: Gloria Simmons deserved to be surprised. The Simmons family played the first half of the game the way they played everything, steadily, with good humor, with the kind of low-key competitiveness that from a family of people who take things seriously without making a production of it. Gloria was sharp. She buzzed in on answers that surprised even her sons. The audience had warmed to her immediately, her composure, to the dry timing of her humor, to the way she straightened her pearls between rounds like a woman settling in for a long, satisfying afternoon. Steve Harvey had noticed her too. He liked her. He sought her out during the breaks between rounds for the easy conversation he had with contestants he found genuinely interesting, and Gloria gave him the kind of measured, thoughtful answers that made him work slightly harder to get the laugh. He respected that. Midway through the game, during a commercial break, something changed in the production team's energy. Gloria noticed it only vaguely, a slightly elevated level of movement, a producer speaking quietly into a headset with an expression of focused concentration. She assumed it was a technical matter and returned her attention to the game. She did not notice when Steve Harvey was taken aside briefly and spoken to in a low voice by the show's segment producer. She did not see Steve's expression shift as he listened, or the way he nodded slowly, once, before returning to the stage with the composed professionalism of a man who had just been given information that required him to be extremely careful. What Steve had been told was this: Renee Simmons, now Renee Simmons Porter, age 42, living in Atlanta, Georgia, had contacted the show's production team 8 weeks earlier. She had seen the family's application notification, had recognized her mother's name, and had reached out through the show services coordinator with a single, carefully worded request. She wanted to see her mother. She did not know if her mother would want to see her. She was prepared for either answer. But she had asked, and the show had spent the weeks since working to make it possible, and now she was in the building. She was backstage. She had been there for 40 minutes, in a green room 2 corridors away waiting. Steve Harvey resumed the game. He was excellent at his job, and he played the remaining rounds with exactly the warmth and energy the audience expected. But beneath it, he was managing something, holding the knowledge of what was about to happen, keeping it contained while the game moved toward its conclusion, making sure that when the moment came, it came correctly. The Simmons family won the main game. The audience applauded. Bernard put his arm around his mother. Gloria smiled the smile of a woman who was genuinely pleased and entirely unsuspecting. Steve stepped forward. He had a particular way of signaling to his audience that something was shifting. A slight change in his posture, a softening in his voice, a quality of stillness that appeared in him just before something real was about to happen. Those who watched the show regularly recognized it. The studio audience recognized it now. Miss Gloria, Steve said. He had stopped using her last name an hour ago, the way he did with contestants he had genuinely connected with. Before we move on to Fast Money, I need to take a moment. Because something happened today that doesn't happen on this show. Something that I have to be honest with you about, because you deserve honesty. Gloria looked at him. Her hands, resting on the podium, were very still. All right, she said. When your family applied to be on Family Food, Steve said, choosing each word with visible care, someone else found out about it. Someone who has wanted to reach out to you for a long time. Someone who asked us if we could help them find the right moment. Gloria's expression did not change immediately. She was a woman who had trained herself over 23 years not to react too quickly to things that sounded like what she most wanted to hear, because that road had led to pain too many times. What are you saying to me? She asked. Her voice was level, careful. Steve looked at her directly. Miss Gloria, your daughter Renee is in this building. She has been here for the last hour. She asked if she could see you, and she's been waiting to know whether you would want to see her. The studio went completely silent. Gloria Simmons stood at the Family Feud podium for a long moment without moving. Her son Bernard, standing beside her, had known. He had been part of the planning for the past 3 weeks, had been the one to confirm with the producers that his mother would want this, had spent 3 weeks keeping the secret and watching his mother go through her ordinary days not knowing what was coming. He had tears on his face now that he had stopped trying to hold back. Clifton, who had not known, looked between his brother and his mother with an expression of complete bewilderment that slowly, as comprehension arrived, transformed into something else entirely. Gloria raised one hand to her mouth. Just one hand, pressed flat against her lip. Her eyes were closed. Steve waited. When Gloria opened her eyes they were wet. But her voice when she spoke was steady. Where is she? Steve Harvey had given a signal to the production team the moment Gloria asked the question. He turned to the audience, and his voice was quieter than the audience had heard it all afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are about to see is real. This family has not seen each other in 23 years. I am asking you to hold your applause and give them the space they need. What happens next belongs to them. The audience did not make a sound. The door at the side of the stage, the same door the Simmons family had entered through, opened. Renee Simmons, Porter, was 42 years old, and she walked through that door the way people walk when they are terrified and determined in equal measure. She was dressed simply, her hands at her sides, her eyes finding her mother before anything else in the room. She stopped when she saw Gloria. Gloria had turned fully away from the podium. She was facing the door. She was standing the way people stand when they are trying very hard to keep themselves upright. For a moment, 2 seconds, 3, mother and daughter simply looked at each other across the stage. 23 years of silence in a room that held its breath. Then Renee said, "Mama." It was barely audible. The microphones in the studio caught it only because the room was so completely quiet. Gloria Simmons crossed the stage. She did not walk slowly or carefully the way she had walked in that morning. She moved with a directness that had nothing measured about it. The movement of a woman who had spent 23 years maintaining composure and was no longer required to. She reached her daughter and pulled her in, and Renee wrapped both arms around her mother, and for a long time they did not move. Bernard sat down on the edge of the stage step. Clifton stood with both hands over his face. Steve Harvey turned away from the family and faced the audience. He did not say anything. He pressed his lips together, looked up briefly at the studio ceiling, and composed himself with visible effort. When he turned back, his eyes were red at the corners. He waited until Gloria and Renee had separated slightly, still holding each other's arms, still close but able to speak. Then he stepped forward gently. "I don't want to intrude on this," he said, "but I have to ask, because I think everyone in this room needs to hear it. How are you both doing right now?" Renee answered first. Her voice was unsteady but clear. "I have been trying to get to this moment for 4 years," she said. "I made mistakes. I was too proud for too long, and then I was too afraid. I didn't know if my mother would want to see me. I didn't know if I had waited too long." She looked at Gloria. "I didn't know if I still had a mother." Gloria reached up and touched her daughter's face. The gesture was so simple and so complete that several members of the production crew, Hardened professionals who had worked on live television for decades had to look away. You have always had a mother, Gloria said. That was never something you could lose. Steve Harvey said nothing for a full 10 seconds. When he spoke, his voice was lower than the audience had heard it all day. Miss Gloria, I have asked a lot of people a lot of questions on this stage. I don't think I have ever heard a better answer than that one. He turned to the audience. We're gonna take a break. This family needs some time. And honestly, he said, with a quiet smile, so do I. The producers made decision not to continue with Fast Money that afternoon. In its place, they filmed a short additional segment with the family, all four of them together on the stage. Gloria with one arm around Renee and the other around Bernard, while Clifton stood beside them looking like a man who had just had a very important year compressed into a single hour. The segment was warm, unscripted, and ran as the closing portion of the episode. When the episode aired 5 weeks later, the response was unlike anything the Family Feud team had measured in years. The clip of the reunion, from the moment the door opened to Gloria's words, "You have always had a mother," was viewed more than 80 million times in the first 72 hours. It was shared not just on entertainment platforms but in parenting groups, family therapy forums, and grief support communities. The phrase "you have always had a mother" became the most quoted line from any Family Feud episode in the show's history. It appeared on handwritten notes tucked into birthday cards. It was cited by family counselors in session. A grief therapist in Chicago wrote a widely shared article about it, arguing that Gloria's words illustrate syllables what years of therapeutic language often struggled to convey, that certain kinds of love are not conditional on contact. Viewer responses poured in by the thousands. Estranged adult children who called their parents the night the episode aired. Parents who had given up on reconnection and found in Gloria's composure the courage to try once more. One message, read on air during a follow-up segment, was from a woman in Phoenix who wrote, "I haven't spoken to my daughter in 11 years. I watched this episode 3 times. The third time I picked up the phone. She answered. I don't know what comes next." But she answered. For Gloria Simmons and her daughter Renee, what came next was slow and careful and real. They did not pretend that 23 years could be compressed into a single afternoon of tears. They began with weekly phone calls, then visits. Renee, who had 2 children of her own, a son aged 9 and a daughter aged 6, brought them to Greensboro to meet their grandmother for the first time in the spring following the episode. Gloria, who had kept a photograph of Renee on her mantelpiece for 23 years, placed a new photograph beside it after that visit. A picture taken in her backyard on a Sunday afternoon. Renee seated in a lawn chair with both children in her lap and Gloria standing behind them with her hands on Renee's shoulders, smiling the smile of a woman who has set something down that she carried for a very long time. Bernard, who had held the secret and coordinated with the producers for 3 weeks, said afterward that the hardest part had not been keeping the secret. It had been the 3 weeks of watching his mother go through her ordinary days, making her coffee, tending her garden, going to church, while knowing what was coming and not being able to tell her. She deserved every second of that surprise, he said. She had earned it. Steve Harvey spoke about the episode in multiple interviews over the following months. He was consistent in one particular point. The moment that had stayed with him most was not the reunion itself, visible and unmistakable as it was the 2 seconds before it. The pause between the door opening and Renee saying "Mama," the held breath of a moment that could have gone any number of ways and went exactly right. In this job, you learn very quickly that you cannot manufacture real, he said. You can set it up, you can create the conditions. But the moment itself, that belongs to the people in it. My job that afternoon was just to stay out of the way and let it happen. That's not always easy for me, he smiled, but it was worth it. The Family Feud production team quietly created an internal protocol following the episode, a formal process for handling audience-sourced family reconnection requests, complete with a dedicated coordinator, a mental health consultant, and a rigorous consent process on all sides. The team named it the Gloria Protocol. In the 2 years following its creation, it facilitated 3 additional family reunions, each handled with the same care and deliberateness that had characterized Gloria's. Renee Simmons, Porter, asked in an interview what she would say to people who were carrying a similar estrangement and felt the door was permanently closed. Thought carefully before answering. I would say that the door is only closed until someone opens it, she said. And it doesn't have to be a grand gesture. It doesn't have to be a television show. It just has to be a decision. A decision that love matters more than pride, and that the person you're missing is worth whatever it costs you to say so. She paused, then added, I waited 4 years after I made that decision to actually act on it. I almost waited too long. Don't wait as long as I did. Gloria Simmons returned to her quiet life in Greensboro. Her garden, her church, her books, her coffee in the mornings on the back porch. But the back porch was louder now on Sundays, and the kitchen smelled of cooking for more people than before, and the photograph on the mantelpiece had 2 pictures where it used to have 1. She told her pastor, in a Sunday after service conversation a few months after the episode aired, that she had thought for many years about what it would feel like if Renee came back. She had imagined it many times. She had imagined it as something dramatic and complicated and emotionally overwhelming. But when it happened, she said, all I felt was that she was there, that she was standing in front of me and she was real and she was mine. All the years, all the hurt, it didn't disappear, but it stepped back. It made room. She smiled. That's what love does when it gets the chance. It makes room.